What if the life that you've always dreamt of led to your tragic and untimely end? Would you still want that life? When a young dreamer named Karina Holmer decided to chase her dreams across the Atlantic, she would unknowingly become the main character of a grisly tale that has haunted investigators for nearly 30 years. The world can truly be a cruel place sometimes, and this is the gut-wrenching story of Karina Holmer. It's the year 1996 in Skellingard, Sweden. Karina Holmer had just turned 20 years old. She lived all of her life in her home country and knew every corner of her small village by heart. But unlike the other young people around her, those who were content with the small town life, Karina was not. She wanted more than what her tiny village could offer her. It's what she dreamt of. While surrounded by forests and other natural beauty, Karina's imagination wasn't going to be satisfied by the simple life that her home afforded her. She wanted to see the world through her eyes and not through some book or film. Born into a working-class family, Karina attended the local school just like all the other kids in town. She was bright, a member of a pony club, as well as the Swedish version of the Girl Scouts. Whatever spare time she got, she spent with her head in the clouds. Just like the Western movies she'd seen, she wanted to be a woman of means, one who had the ability to travel the world and live an exciting life. But opportunities for young people to break out of traditional roles in Skellingard were scarce in the 90s. It was the kind of place where kids were expected to learn their lifelong jobs from their parents, and most were fine with this way of life. But that expectation only fueled Karina's desire to see and do more with her life. With limited chances at hand, the only way Karina knew to make her dream a reality was by playing in the local daily lottery, hoping that one day she'd get lucky and win big. And in March of 1996, fortune smiled upon her. Karina won 10,000 krona, which is about $1,500 on a scratch-off lottery ticket. Once that money hit her hand, she knew immediately what she wanted to do with it. She was going to go to the United States, and nothing was going to get in her way. After making all of the necessary preparations, she set out on her journey. She gave her father one last hug at the airport and whispered in his ear, "I hope that I'm doing the right thing." And with that, Karina was off. She caught a plane from Sweden to the United States to begin a new and hopefully exciting chapter in her life. Unfortunately, Karina's good fortune would soon turn sour. After arriving in the US, Karina Holmer settled in Boston, Massachusetts. She found work in the affluent town of Dover as an au pair, caring for the young children of two successful and well-off artists. Her employers were Frank Rapp, a commercial photographer, and his wife, Susan Nichter, a prominent painter. Karina was excited for the employment and the opportunities that came with it, so she did her best to blend in to her new environment. She would spend weekdays caring for the kids, who absolutely adored her, but the weekends were a different life entirely. Karina was given the keys to an apartment that the Rapps owned in South Boston, one that also doubled as Frank's photography studio. There, she was free to spend her weekends however she wanted. And it didn't take long for Karina to make new friends. She gravitated towards a group of young nannies that were also in the country working for families like her. And it was this network of friends that she would socialize with, and also dive into the Boston nightlife with. Being a good-looking woman with a fake ID and access to a fancy loft in the city, 20-year-old Karina was quite popular amongst her friends. They'd attend different clubs, drinking and dancing all night, before returning to Karina's place to crash out in the morning. She even found a little bit of love when she began dating a local policeman. It seemed as if she was thoroughly enjoying the perks of her new setting, a life that her village back home just couldn't offer to her. However, that fun and carefree life would be short-lived for Karina. On the night of June 21st, 1996, Karina and her foreign au pair friends got ready for a night out. It happened to be the summer solstice, which back in Sweden is a big deal for some. Knowing this, Karina wanted to celebrate it in the city. Dressed up in tight silver pants, a black top, and leather shoes, Karina was in great spirits and just wanted to party. The group made their way through several clubs downtown and finished their night at Zanzibar, a now defunct club on Boylston Place. After a few hours in the club, as well as several cocktails, the young Swede was more than just a bit tipsy, and at some point had lost track of her friends. Something that was far too easy to do back in the days before cell phones. At some point in the night, Karina had passed out in the bathroom of the club, and eventually she was asked to leave the premises by the doorman at around 3:30 a.m. on the morning of June 22nd. Karina left without a fuss, and she was seen outside of the club dancing with a homeless man, while also complaining about how her friends had ditched her. This would sadly be the last time that anyone would see Karina alive. On the morning of Sunday, June 23rd, approximately 30 hours after Karina was last seen, a separate homeless man was sifting his way through a dumpster in the Fenway apartment complex at 1091 Boylston Street. As he searched through the trash for recyclables, he grabbed a hold of a dark green trash bag deep in the dumpster. It was heavy, and the man figured it might have something of value inside. But what he found when he ripped the bag open would likely haunt his thoughts for a long time to come. Once he realized what it was that he was looking at, he screamed in terror and ran off down the street looking for help. Boston police would be called to the scene, and once the trash bag was removed and emptied, its contents came into full view for the authorities. What they found were the partial remains of a deceased young blonde woman. I say partial due to the fact that this bag only contained the upper body of the victim. You see, she had been cut in half, just below the ribs, and even after an extensive search of the area, including all the surrounding dumpsters, the rest of her body was never located. It was clear that whoever had done this was very skilled at dismembering a body. The cut that separated her torso from her lower half was clean and precise, likely made using a power saw. Her body had been thoroughly cleaned as well, leaving no fingerprints, identifying substances, or even makeup on her face. The only visible impressions on her were red ligature marks around her neck and wrists, indicating that she had likely been bound and strangled by a rope or a cord. Just as unsettling, most of the blood from her body had been drained before she had been disposed of. Authorities knew this because the trash bag itself was nearly dry. While almost all DNA evidence had been wiped away, forensic experts were able to lift a partial print off the trash bag, but after running it through the national database, there were no matches to be found, meaning that whoever had done this was likely unknown to the law. The victim had no identification on her, so no one initially knew who she was for certain. Local news stations quickly began reporting that a young woman's torso had been found, and that story began to spread like wildfire through the streets of Boston. Karina's employers, the Rapnichters, were watching the news that evening, and this story caught their attention. Concerned by the general description of the victim, they tried contacting their nanny, but were unsuccessful in reaching her. Since it was the weekend, they hadn't spoken to her since Friday afternoon. When they couldn't get a hold of Karina, they contacted the authorities. At first, they had hoped that their worries would be put to rest, that either they would hear from Karina herself or the police would say that this victim was somebody else. But that wasn't the case at all. Authorities would eventually come to identify the remains as that of Karina Holmer. The Holmer family was made aware of their daughter's demise, and as anyone could imagine, it sent shockwaves not just through the family, but through the entire village. They had no idea why anyone would do such a thing to their child, their sister, their neighbor. And it was that exact feeling that fueled the desire of justice for that sweet girl who left searching for greener pastures, only to be met with such a horrifying end. The gruesome nature of the crime stunned even the most seasoned investigators. They too wondered who would commit such a heinous crime, and why. They knew Karina had been placed in the trash can purposely, but with the crime scene unknown, no murder weapon, and a lack of any evidence leading up to the murder, the first order of business for cops was to find out who last saw Karina that Friday night, what time this was, and where it was exactly. But to do that, they would have to retrace every step that she took. Karina's friends and most of the people at the bar seemed to have conflicting stories about when she left the club, making it incredibly difficult for detectives to figure out how and, more importantly, whom she had left with. One of her friends recalled seeing Karina outside, talking and dancing with a man and his big white dog. Both man and dog were described as wearing matching Superman t-shirts. And as crazy as that may sound, multiple people shared this exact same account. After combing through all the grainy CCTV footage from that night, the man was eventually identified as Herb Whitten. He was known to locals as an eccentric guy, one who'd hang around the outside of the club, waiting to talk to just about anyone who would give him the time of day. He would regularly have his white Great Pyrenees dog with him, using the pup as a conversation starter with drunk women leaving the club. Although, after proper scrutiny, Herb was considered harmless and was ruled out as a possible suspect since he had an airtight alibi that evening. Herb had been pulled over for speeding on his way home that night, about 15 miles north of Boston, and an hour or so after people saw him with Karina. And while he was cleared of any possible involvement, being a suspect in a murder case is a lot, and it proved too much for Herb. He would go on to take his own life a year after Karina's death. Those close to Herb cited a deteriorating mental state in his final days, and they attributed this to the stress of being considered in the investigation. There would be another possible suspect, though. On the night of her death, Karina was spotted speaking to another man, a guy by the name of John Zawiz. Coincidentally, Zawiz lived less than 2 blocks from where Karina's body had been found, and John himself struck a rather odd chord with police. He was the frontman for a band called Sleep Chamber, a band with a very, let's say, interesting sound to their music. Their live shows would also involve demonstrations of bondage, so it was known that John was familiar with ropes and restraints. Zawiz had also reportedly been struggling with a worsening case of heroin addiction, and was said to be in a volatile state at the time. Although, after extensively searching his apartment, the police couldn't find anything that would connect John to Karina, and he too was eventually ruled out as a suspect. Finally, another witness who happened to be a regular at Zanzibar claimed to have seen Karina in the early hours of June 22nd, sitting inside of a gray Mitsubishi car parked outside of the club. He mentioned to the police that he had approached the car and had seen 2 unidentified men with Karina. According to him, he tried to get Karina to come with him before one of the men in the car threatened him and forced the witness to be on his way. Neither of these alleged Mitsubishi men could ever be identified, and due to the level of intoxication from some of the witnesses, it was hard for the police to determine the truth from alcohol-induced stories. The rest of the footage from outside of the club didn't yield any more leads, and considering the time when this took place, even the footage from inside of the club was grainy and limited. In addition, there were no text messages for investigators to look through, no selfies to examine for clues, and no GPS to track. With no crime scene and no way to determine why she was killed, where she was killed, and who killed her, the investigators began to try and get more information from Karina's host family, the Rapps. But to their surprise, Frank and Susan were uncooperative and rather hostile toward the police. In fact, they lawyered up right after being interviewed by authorities. They weren't seen as suspects at this point, so the move absolutely stood out. The loft apartment where Karina stayed on weekends was searched thoroughly, and no evidence of the crime taking place there was found. During the investigation, though, police discovered that Karina had entered into the United States illegally, with no visa or paperwork expressing how long she would be in the country or when she would return home to Sweden. When asked just how Karina came to be employed by them, the Rapps would simply refuse to answer. As the investigation progressed, it was learned that Karina's life in the US wasn't as glamorous as she had expected. In a letter she had written to her sister Johanna, she complained of how much work she had to do as an au pair, and how terribly she missed the simple life of her village. The police then discovered a rather ominous letter that the 20-year-old had sent to her best friend back in Sweden. In the letter, she wrote, "Something terrible has happened. I can't tell you right now what it is, but I'll tell you once I get home." Sadly, Karina never got that chance. It also came to the surface shortly after that the Rapps had gone through 5 different au pairs over the course of 13 short months. When the news of Karina's murder broke, some of their former employees would come out to describe Frank as a creep, one who had made several advances towards them during their time of employment. Rumors began to spread about a possible affair between Karina and Frank, and this led to people speculating that the loft may have been their secret hookup spot, and Karina may have even gotten pregnant, which could explain the removal of her bottom half, at least in part, something done to erase any potential evidence. All of these ideas were speculation though, as there was no concrete evidence to back it all up. It's worth noting an odd event that occurred at the Rapp home that only served to further these rumors though. On Monday the 24th, just a day after Karina's torso was discovered, the dumpster outside of Frank and Susan's condo mysteriously caught on fire, leaving the dumpster and its contents burnt to a crisp. The charred remains of the trash were turned over to the police, but nothing viable was ever pulled from them, as everything had been completely incinerated. To the public, though, it would appear as if the Rapps may have tried to destroy evidence that could incriminate them. The thought of it being a timely coincidence seemed just a bit too far-fetched. There's another interesting aside. Susan, being a painter, had on her website a painting titled Girl in Can. I don't have an eye for art myself, so the best I can do here is to describe to you the image so you can do your own interpreting. The painting itself is made up of a few unsettling images. The first being the bust of a woman in a trash can. The second image is a ghostly hand holding the can. And finally, there's the disembodied face of a man looking on. Susan also had another piece titled Levitation Lasso. This one was a drawing where she had drawn a young woman flat on her back with the loop of a lasso around her waist. The lasso itself shares an eerie resemblance to saw blades ready to cut the woman in half. And again, there's an image of a man who appears to be in control of the lasso. If you'd like to see these paintings yourself, they're still up on Susan's website to this day. Neither Frank nor Susan were ever charged in connection to Karina's murder, and in a statement that Frank made to the Boston Globe, he's quoted as saying, "I'm definitely not a suspect. My family is completely devastated by this loss." With pressure mounting from Ola Holmer, Karina's father, and everyone who had heard of this case, detectives had no suspects and no clue concerning what happened to the young woman. The brutality of the crime shocked the city of Boston, but it was the lack of answers that made it even harder to stomach. Karina's cop boyfriend was investigated, but he was never considered a viable suspect, although some in the public have concerns with just how quickly he was cleared. And this too led to even more speculation. For investigators, the trail eventually ran cold, and developments in Karina's case were nearly non-existent in the years that would follow. That is, until May of 1999, when a similar discovery was made in Hollywood, Florida. The torso of Delia Lorna Mendez had been discovered in a dumpster. She had been split exactly at the waist, just as Karina had been. Boston detectives were geared to finally get a lead on Karina's case, but it quickly came to pass that there were just too many differences for the two women to be connected. You see, unlike Karina, Delia had been badly beaten, and while she'd been cut into two, both of her halves were recovered. She also hadn't been washed clean, nor had her blood been drained before depositing her into the dumpster, which made the scene even more of a mess. While this was a horrific case on its own, it's believed that Delia's murder occurred due to her ties to local gangs and had no link to the murder of Karina Holmer. So just like that, Boston PD was back to square one, where, unfortunately, this case still stands today. For nearly 30 years, there have been a lot of conspiracies surrounding Karina's murder, and the lack of a physical crime scene has plagued investigators for just as long. Theories have ranged from a serial killer to a personal vendetta. Some have speculated about Karina's host family, while others believe she may have fallen victim to someone she met that night. The absence of any real evidence didn't just cause Karina's case to go cold. It completely froze it over. The detectives are nowhere closer to knowing who committed this morbid act now than they were 29 years ago. There are a lot of questions left unanswered, but the largest and most unavoidable is, who killed Karina Holmer and why? This and other questions may remain unanswered for the time being, but one thing is for certain. There's a person out there living with a memory of exactly what it means to torture, kill, and cut a body in half. For everyone back in Sweden, the summer solstice is still a day of celebration, but for the Holmer family, it's a painful remembrance of their Karina, who never made it back home. Karina Holmer's journey to America was supposed to be a new chapter for her, an exciting experience, but instead, it turned out to be the closing pages of her book. Maybe one day, another chapter will be written on Karina's behalf, one not rooted in mystery, but in truth. I'd like to leave you with this. 4 years before she would embark on her journey to the US, Karina wrote a poem entitled Life. She stated in part, "The richest gift you ever got is life. Don't throw that away or ever step on it, but hold it high in your hands." Sadly, Karina's gift was brutally taken from her in the most tragic of ways, and somewhere out there, the person who stole that gift still walks freely. I want to thank you for making it this far, and if you enjoyed today's episode and would like to support the channel even further, consider joining our Patreon at patreon.com/Malevolent Mischief. There, you'll get access to all of our content both early and ad-free for those of you that are into that. I want to thank you again for tuning in, and like always, I hope to catch you on the next one.